Hello and welcome back to the ProFit podcast. I'm here as usual, Matt Robinson, and I'm joined by my usual co-host, Paul Campe. How are you doing, Paul?
Hello, everyone. Yes, I'm very good, pal. Thank you. You?
Yes, I'm good. Thank you. And obviously, we're both very excited because today we are joined by a special guest, aren't we, Paul? We've got a guest on with us today.
We've been hotly anticipating this one. We did the mini series on nutrition just recently, and we're really pleased to have a very special guest on for you today. Yeah.
Yeah. So to let the cat out of the bag, our special guest today is Dr. Marc Bubbs, who is a practicing licensed naturopathic doctor over in Canada. He's actually based in the UK at the moment. He works with the national Canadian basketball team as well, and he's authored best-selling book Peak, and more recently a book that myself and Paul have recently consumed called Peak 40. And I know that Marc as well works with a number of individual athletes across the world. So he knows a lot of stuff about a lot of things. And Ben McDonald told us we absolutely had to have him on the show. So we listened to Ben and got him on. And as impressive as all those credentials are, the thing that really stood out for me and Paul as well when we were looking to get someone on to talk about nutrition was that Marc is a father, he's a husband, he's like a normal guy that seems to approach nutrition from a human perspective rather than just science alone. So that's something that we think is very, very important. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Marc. How are you doing?
Oh, I appreciate you having me on there.
And you're currently based in sunny England with us, aren't you?
I'm currently in the UK, yeah. So it's everyone says it's getting colder. I'm like, you should see how cold it gets in Canada. This is nothing.
And I thought a great place for us to start, Marc, just to sort of let people into what it is that you do, is give people an insight into what is a naturopathic doctor, what is the type of work that you do in general for someone that's not come across your work before. What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I work in sort of two areas. So I'm the director of nutrition, a performance nutritionist for Canada Basketball. So on the one side, I work in the sport and the elite sport end, and whether it's basketball players, obviously predominantly with Canada Basketball or consulting. And then, more of the naturopathic work, which is really just a philosophy of trying to figure out, all these chronic conditions that we have these days, whether it's high blood sugars or hypertension or people struggling with like low mood or anxiety. How does nutrition, how does exercise, how do lifestyle factors influence that? And it's funny to say that today because it's great that so many people realize that those things influence, but 20 plus years ago when I was going to go to medical school, nobody thought that. It was like crickets. You're sort of, what's going on here? So it's been really cool over the last 20 years to see that, especially from a perspective of a personal trainer, because having worked as a personal trainer, early in my career and putting myself through school, that's where you can build the best relationship with your client, right? That's where you get the closest contact. And so it's amazing then you're actually in a much better position than even a nutritionist or a doctor to kind of layer in a lot of these things because your client trusts you. And so, sorry, sort of long-winded way to answer. I work on both the general population, 30s, 40s, 50s, people working at desks all day in businesses and helping them out. And then also on the athlete side. And there's obviously big differences between those groups, but I like how you started this podcast. There's a lot of similarities too, and that's because we're human. So an elite athlete can struggle with breakfast the same way that the rest of us can, right? So there you go.
100%. And the book, if anybody's not read the book Peak 40, we'd highly recommend going out and getting it. Since we knew you were coming on, we just consumed it over the last couple of weeks. And in that, one thing we wanted to ask you about is the concept of wicked and kind learning environments. That really stood out when we read it. Like the field of nutrition is quite a wicked learning environment, isn't it? Could you kind of tell people a bit about that? And then we'll talk a bit about how you maybe help people learn in that wicked environment. What do you do to help clients get through it?
Yeah, I mean, that's ultimately the crux of this whole story. And it's like, a kind learning environment is one where the result is right there in front of you. So even though golf doesn't feel like a very kind sport, when you hit a golf shot, the result's right there. So if you hit a 30-yard slice, well, the path, the club came in a certain way and the face was a certain way. And if you know a bit about the swing, you can fix it immediately. Wicked environments are where there's just more ambiguity, more uncertainty. And a really nice example of this was a study done in learning languages. So two groups, one of them was learning French and the classical, memorize these words, memorize this conjugation, and we're going to test you on it. And the other group had to go into a full immersion, right? So they were learning French. They went into a room. The instructor couldn't speak to them in English at all. And they were assessed every month leading up to the 6-month sort of test, real world test. And the group that was memorizing the words, they were getting 90% on all their tests. They felt like they were learning fantastically well. The group that was in the full immersion was really struggling, right? They didn't think they were learning anything. And of course, that's sort of the deep learning group is that side. And at the end of the 6 months, both groups get released out into a real world scenario. And of course, the group that thought they were doing well struggled mightily in the real world scenario. And then the group that thought they were taking all these lumps along the way, all of a sudden realized, hey, wow, I can actually have a conversation in French, or order my food, or navigate myself. And so this is where we get to with nutrition. It's easy in a month to take someone to shed a bunch of weight off of them. The problem is 2 or 3 months later or a year later, they're not only going to be back to where they were, they're going to be worse off because we're sort of giving them the solutions.
Yeah.
Right. We're not really teaching them habits or actually deconstructing the problems. And so, I think that's the biggest challenge when we're talking about nutrition is that, people want results right away. They see the rapid transformation, and it's tough to build the buy-in of, hey, let's make this, 6 months, a year, and let's build the right habits along the way.
Yeah, Matt and I were speaking about this yesterday, weren't we? About the industry is still very, very visual. And when it's advertised to come and have services with a personal trainer, it's still very much based on come here and you'll get this result in 8 weeks, 10 weeks.
Instagram photo, before, after.
Yeah, right. And that's important. I think that's, sometimes important in advertising and marketing. It's part of it.
It's part of it, for sure.
Everybody understands that. But are there things that you do with your clients, different types of clients here as well, by the sounds of it, are there things that you do in order to help them see that long-term, that this is going to be a wicked learning environment, that it is going to be sometimes a bit uncertain, but if you keep showing up, you're going to do great?
Yeah, I think a big part of that was basically going over to just coaching clients in blocks of time to say, hey, if you're not in this for 12 weeks, and then this is where even in clinical practice, like the naturopathic medicine in Canada is more like a medical model, like seeing your GP, and trying to help people in these sort of haphazard ways is difficult because you give somebody a plan, they make some progress, but there's always going to be challenges. And someone always thinks once the challenge hits, well, I better try this diet, or I better swap it for this thing, rather than figuring out what the problem actually is, because it doesn't even matter what diet you pick, right? All the dietary strategies operate by the same principles. So you're going to run into some type of roadblock at some point. And so it just got to be difficult to always be sort of putting out fires with these one-off strategies over the years. And so, a few years back, I decided to just go to these blocks of time. And it's great in a lot of ways, because not being a personal trainer anymore, I don't get to see my clients for that hour, 2-3 times a week to really build that relationship. And if you're just coaching someone in nutrition, you only know them for half an hour. It's really difficult to actually build that. And so the nice part is once you get to know people a little bit better, you can tease out the little areas that don't always come through on an intake form that you start to realize are some key roadblocks. And then the other part is that people buy in, for lack of a better term, they're kind of stuck with you for the 12 weeks. So they're going to buy in more to the idea of like, there are going to be a few lumps along the way. We're going to work them out together. And it's pretty cool when you actually see a client who you could tell the point at which they would normally pull the plug, and they have to just, face the problem head on, and they come out the other side of it. You can just, the level of confidence and the level of the fact that they can, sort of fly the plane a little bit on their own rather than having to always rely on, X or Y diet is really a powerful thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you mentioned in the book about shaping the environment. So that's part of it. You do a block of time, you're going to work with somebody for an amount of time, understanding that roadblocks are going to come up.
Yeah, 100%.
And in terms, I'm interested to know, Mark, as like just thinking as like a personal trainer that will probably encounter the same type of conversation. Let's say you're a few weeks into working with someone, and then they come in to see you and they say, I'm struggling with this. This doesn't seem to be working. I'm thinking of doing this instead. As an actual conversation, how do you navigate that? Because I can't imagine that you just sit there and go, no, absolutely not. Don't do that. I can imagine there's a bit more.
God, no, don't do that.
I imagine it's a bit more tactile than that. But I know from personal experience, especially when you're younger as a personal trainer, it's easy to just go, no, that doesn't work. Don't do it. So like, how would you navigate those types of conversations with clients?
It's a great question. And it's definitely one where the more, as a trainer or person grows in their career and more people are buying into the process, those conversations get easier and easier. So it's always going to be most challenging at the beginning. And, one of the things I like to do with my clients is to really implement things gradually. Like in the first week, we just address breakfast, right? It's like, let's give you one thing to do. Let's see at the end of the week if you could accomplish that thing. And then, it's generally pretty straightforward and people get a nice win and we start to build some momentum that way. And I think having that, being upfront with people to say, hey, we're going to tackle things in a week by week basis, or the trainer might have an outline of the things that they want to do. And to try to build in that idea of patience, that even in the first 2 weeks, we're not even after, weight loss, right? We just want to be able to start to build these habits. So that would be the first thing. And then to your question around, people want to try different strategies. I mean, for personal trainers, again, it's good to know that all the diets work via the same principles, right? So think of them like clubs in your golf bag. You wouldn't go hitting a 5-iron all the way around the course, but when it comes to nutrition, that's kind of what we do, right? You're either low carb or vegan or paleo. And if you deviate from that, somehow you've broken the rules and the paleo police are going to come and take you away and you're going to be ostracized. Like, there are people that would do well with a plant-based diet, but eat 5% of animal protein. And so, if trainers can understand that everything's a tool, we then don't have to get so strong in terms of our response to people, right? Like I would try to get the trainers, rather than explaining to people, because as rational as we all are, I mean, most of the decisions we make are subconscious, right? Like we're running on emotions. I think it was Dr. Peter Jensen, our sports psych at Canada Basketball, says something like 90% of all the decisions we make are based on emotion. And but the natural reaction for the trainer is always like, or even the doctor is like, let me explain the rationale why X or Y diet or training or medication is better. That's not really going to stick for that client typically. And so a suggestion I would have is just to flip it to the person, like to listen to, oh, you're interested in a plant-based diet or a keto diet. How do you think that might benefit you? Why are you, let's just bring it back to them so we can really tease out the real root causes and reasons why they're doing things. And even then, you don't have to necessarily address that with your next kind of rebuttal or response, but just make a note, put that away. And then next week or the week after, again, the beauty of being a personal trainer is they're coming back to you week after week. So you can really, a bit like a chess match, you can kind of plan where you want to put things for later down the road. Whereas again, for even like a doctor's visit, the doctor has to end up in this kind of ping pong game of information that, it doesn't lead to the best outcomes. And unfortunately, that's what we see with, the rates of diabetes and obesity and everything else going around.
Yeah. I love that it's a patience game, that you've got time to actually implement them changes. Like you don't have to rush in. You can listen, take it to one side, make a note of it and bring it back to the next session.
Yeah. And especially because most diets end up gently increasing protein, increasing vegetables, and reducing processed food. So even if the person doesn't want to do the diet that you think is best, they're still going to get one of those kind of key areas that are moving in the right direction. So take that win and then strategize for later down the road. And then you can, impress your client by helping them to navigate the problems.
Yeah. Very cool.
And you mentioned there, Mark, about, one of the first things is you might tackle someone's breakfast or something like that, and sort of takes us nicely into the next area we wanted to discuss, which was me and Paul understand that, you work with different people, you're going to approach things differently, but from like a big picture view, what would you say are some of the core nutritional principles that you believe apply universally? Like, what are the things that most people should be doing most of the time? If we try and pick out a couple of really simple things that trainers can start to think about so that they can focus on them.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple directions here. I mean, one of them is a bit more on the medical side, in the sense of like, if you've got good blood sugar control, if your inflammation is low, if your lipid panel looks good, you've got the diet that's generally right for you, because that's going to generally reflect somebody who's in a, holding a healthy weight, a leaner body composition, and all those things. And so that's always a nice aspect a trainer could go back to if you refer out to a doc or to somebody in your community to say, hey, let's have a look at those annual physical numbers that you do. Because, if fasting glucose is up towards the high end of normal, or HA1C, which is your 3-month average of blood sugars, the normal ranges are quite wide. And so we can actually start to tell, like, okay, well, we could improve that, or wow, that person's really bang on. So those are some of the higher order principles that you might start to build a network and refer out to, because then you can really, and those things will actually improve in overweight individuals just from exercise, which is a really cool thing. It just shows the power of exercise to be able to start to reverse some of those things. And of course, with weight loss as well. When it comes to, heuristics, I mean, with Peak 40, we talk about this idea, like if we can start the day well, so avoid the kind of processed breakfast that brings on board a lot of calories, that exaggerates the blood sugar response and leads to that hypoglycemic dip mid-morning. And so our clients are reaching for whatever they can get their hands on, because they're busy at work, they're doing a lot of things in the day. If you can start the day well, if you can avoid things going too far off the rails in the evening, which I think all of us during COVID have realized can easily happen, right? Like it turns into a Netflix red wine and ice cream marathon for 18 months, right? Like over 40% of all the calories we eat now come after 6 o'clock, right? So we're really back ending our fueling. And if we're not training at night or hitting the dance floor or something, then obviously that's not only just going to lead to an energy excess and weight gain, it starts to interrupt sleep. So the quality of your sleep goes down. Now your client wakes up the next morning, they're tired. And so we're back on this loop of caffeine and high. So, start the day well, avoid things going off the rails, which, we call master your morning, own your night. And then the last one is set your protein, which isn't, we kind of surprise people because we're not aiming for this optimization protein number. We're aiming for this kind of realistic, if this is the floor and this is all the person ever does, they're going to be healthy in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. They're going to fight off sarcopenia, so muscle loss, osteoporosis, bone loss. And the nice part with that number is it's not that high, right? 1.2 grams of protein per kilogram body weight per day. And, the RDA is only 0.8, but we've got some of the best protein researchers on the planet, like Theo Espoglu at Leeds Beckett here in the UK, or Stu Phillips back at McMaster in Canada, that are petitioning governments to try to raise this RDA because of the beneficial effects it has on that. So if you can get your client to have their worst day be 1.2 grams per kilo and divide that through the day, it's kind of shocking how with just that, like we just changed the breakfast, we cut out some snacking at night, and we got you enough protein. You're going to see your client making all this nice progress in the first 2, 3, 4 weeks. And for me, the really cool thing with that is that your client is not doing very much and getting a bigger payout, a bigger dividend. Whereas all of our clients in training are used to, or in their mind anyway, they're going to work their tails off in the past and they haven't got much to show for it, right?
Yeah, that's great. And we discussed that question, how we were going to ask you that. We wanted the audience to hear that from somebody like you, because in our industry at the minute, there's a hell of a lot of just people talking about, well, it's just an energy balance thing, calories in, calories out. As long as you get that right, it's fine. But from listening to your book, I'm just giving away that I did it on audio now. I didn't read it. But from listening to the book, what was nice to hear was there are patterns to where you should be eating. This master your morning, own your night, that there's a method to the calories and when they go in and the macronutrients. There are still rules to the nutrition. It isn't just eat 1,500 calories a day and you'll be all right.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing how we are creatures of habit, and like our patterns tend to drive all this consumption. And it's calories in, calories out still describe things, but it's like telling someone, hey, there's Rory McIlroy's golf swing. Just go emulate that. It's as simple as that. Well, I tried that; it didn't work out for me.
Yeah, and I think that's where a lot of our clients get stuck. They go, "I'm trying to stick to a calorie target, but I just can't do it." Whereas it's more, there was a lot of habitual work in your book, and I think that's good for people to hear.
And just on that note, I mean, I rarely talk about calories with clients in the general population. Like behind the scenes, I'll be thinking about that. One of the ideas, just to dovetail on what you said there, around this idea of set your protein, is that if we can make that the minimum and make it repeatable, we could actually just throw it in the rearview mirror, and now we can focus in on kind of one thing. Whereas when our clients are busy chasing every single macro, dietary fat doesn't actually change that much in someone's diet. So you sort of know where that is. If protein's stable, now you're left with one variable to really shoot for, right? And it could be different in different folks, but we're trying to automate as much as we can, right? I mean, I've got 3 kids under 8. You guys are busy. Like, we don't have time like we did in our 20s to plan the week around training and have all of our Tupperwares ready. And, we need to help people out in terms of making things easy. And then once they have that rhythm, hey, we can always go, you can always level up and, just like with your training, right?
Yeah, I love that concept as well. Not just a little bit of investment, but quite a large payoff as well. It just makes the client feel successful.
Yeah. I can imagine as well with those types of people, when they start to feel those benefits, they're just sort of like walking around going, I don't really know what I've done, but I feel loads better.
But it's a weird thing to think too, because a lot of trainers are just naturally, oftentimes athletic and lean and these types of things. And they don't realize that their client has been struggling with this for 30 years or 20 years and hasn't had a win in a decade. You know what I mean? Like, and that's where it's like, yeah, let's give them a win. Let's make them feel successful, feel some success. And all of a sudden, it's amazing how that can catapult things. But yeah, for sure.
On a side note, Mark, are you a golfer? Because we've had 3 golf analogies.
I know. Sorry, it was the Ryder Cup last weekend, so
we don't mention that over here. We don't mention that.
Funnily enough, I used to cheer for USA when I was living in Canada, but now I'm over here. I'm cheering for Team Europe. And
all right,
geez, you guys let me down this time.
We got stuffed. Yeah, well, good performance by the US, to be fair.
Yeah, true.
And I know Matt and that was something Matt raised the other day, and we were going to ask that about, do you mention calories to your clients? Because I think all the way through the recent book, there was no mention of calories at all, really.
Yeah, I mean, I like to talk about it in terms of energy.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the same thing, but it's just it's funny how in language there are terms that just carry so much weight, that carry all this baggage to them. And calorie is one of those terms. And because we know that consuming excess protein, right? I mean, we've got studies to the tune of 800 calories excess doesn't convert to body fat. So theoretically it could do, but it doesn't really do it in real life. So when we talk about energy, we're really left with our carbs and our fats, right? And Christopher Gardner's study a few years back, where they followed 2 groups for an entire year, right? I think it was 200 some odd subjects. They controlled for protein, they controlled for calories, which is really important, because in a lot of these studies you'll read, those things aren't controlled for, and that actually influences the outcome. Controlled for both of those, 1 low carb group, 1 low fat group. And at the end of a year, when you look at the results in a bar graph, it looks like you're seeing double, because it looks like it's the same, right? You're almost getting identical weight loss, or a little bit lack thereof in certain people of the group, from the low fat or the low carb group. And so the great news for a practitioner is, hey, you've got 2 tools, right? Like, you could use low carb, you can use low fat, you can use strategies from each to get your clients to where they want to go. But ultimately, those are kind of the fueling, macros that we want to think about. And, if your client's following a keto diet and they're struggling to lose weight, they probably have way too much fat in their diet. Vice versa, if they're following a low fat diet, they're not losing weight, they probably have, too much energy from carbohydrate coming in their diet. Or maybe they're not actually on a low fat diet. But that's how we try to simplify things, so that you can think about, we call them sort of dials of how can we turn those dials. And because carbohydrates have 4 calories per gram, we need to turn that dial more to get the energy down, right? Like a cup of rice, which is, let's say 40 grams of carbohydrates, is 160 calories. That's a pretty nice little serving of rice.
Mm-hmm.
Dietary fats, you got 9 calories per gram, so we're looking at a teaspoon of fat has 135 calories, 130 calories, right? Or 2 tablespoons. Now we're over top of what we got from the rice. And so that fat dial, we don't need to turn quite as much. And so those are just options that the trainer has. And again, in this environment with all this ultra processed food, normally that carbohydrate one's pretty high, the fat as well. But if we just drop the ultra processed food intake, then you get a nice drop in both, and you can kind of cruise to some easy wins before you even get really detailed on, like, this carbohydrate versus that one, or, vice versa. Yeah.
Nice. And that kind of leads us into our next area we wanted to talk. And this, when we spoke about putting this in, I think this needs to be spoken about. It might be teaching people to suck eggs a little bit, the audience, because we're going to talk. We wanted your.
Everybody loves to suck an egg, right?
Yeah, man. Yeah, we wanted you to talk a little bit about proteins, carbs, and fats, and the importance of those macronutrients as well. Again, because some philosophies out there will just say it's just about calories in, calories out, but it really isn't. All the macronutrients are important for different reasons. And just to kind of go through each one and mention the importance of them. And, you talk in the book about having a plant-based or animal-based protein diet. And I think you said, why not both? Like, both are important. Both can be used. Why can't you have both? Why do you need to be one or the other? And a lot of talk about what types of carbohydrates are really good in rich in vitamins and minerals as well, things that the body needs. And that's sometimes missed, I think, by personal trainers.
Yeah. I mean, if we start with protein, I think that the challenge we have with people is they just think protein, it builds muscles, which it certainly does. And muscle is certainly important for longevity and health, but it builds everything in your entire body, right? Like if you're a house, then protein's the brick. So if you want a strong immune system and skin, hair, nails, and connective tissue hormones, all that stuff working well, you need protein. Yeah. And you'll see this with people who are on low energy diets, who don't consume a lot of food. They fail to hit that level of protein intake, and all of a sudden they're struggling with, catching colds and flus, or hair thinning or nails brittle, like all that type of stuff. So protein's a really good place to start. This is where I start the diet of, like, let's get this thing covered, because it's not just bringing on board the amino acids. We've got the research now, I talk about in Peak 40, as you increase protein intake, your vitamins and minerals come right up alongside. Yeah. Right. So like you're eating a multivitamin basically. So you're covering the micronutrient bucket at the same time, which is a nice win. And so if we can get that, get the protein sorted, and to dig a little deeper, I mean, if we think of everything in life as typically a bell curve relationship, 1.2 is sort of towards the bottom of that bell curve as it's moving up. And so if you have clients who are more interested in performance or whatnot, or gaining lean mass, as you climb up towards 1.6 grams per kilogram per day, you do get some significant benefits. And so depending on how much your client weighs or their goals, like you could definitely climb up to that. Now, once you go past that, you're kind of getting, you're almost 90+% of the way home, right? Like once you get to the classic gram per pound body weight, I mean, you're really looking at marginal gains there. And so this is where you got to figure out, what your client's goals are. But protein would be first for me. And in today's environment where we're all sitting down all day, our grandparents' generation, hey, let's start with the rice or the bread or the fuel that we needed to work physical manual labor all day long. But these days it's kind of nicer to start with protein. From there, fats. I mean, most people would agree that monounsaturated fats are sort of the ones to focus on mainly in our diets, and things like, olive oil and avocados and whatnot. But you still get a lot of oleic acid and, red meat. And so if you're eating more real food, then you're going to get a lot of fats. And I would probably just say if you have a client who's on a low fat diet, that's when you want to watch. If they get too low, then all of a sudden those fat soluble vitamins, A, D, E, and K, those can start to get low. And now your client might struggle with some problems, right? Around immunity, around energy, and some of those things. So that's something to watch out for on that end. If you're on the really high fat diet side, then, saturated fat intake, if your client's really overweight and not in good health, that's a problem, right? If your client's in a good body weight and healthy, then if they're exceeding that 10% of saturated fat, which is a typical recommendation to keep it under, if you go over that, it's not really the end of the world if you have a healthy, what we call dietary pattern. And it's basically what you see in the Spanish, right? Everyone says saturated fats are horrible for you. Well, the Spanish consume more than 10%, and they're going to be the longest living people on the planet. So it's a nuanced conversation, right? Like if you're eating well and moving and exercising, and your saturated fats are coming from animal protein rather than jelly babies, then all that matters, right? So that would be the fats. And obviously they bring on board fuel. So, they're a great way to trim out fuel if you need to. And then the one that really swings, I mean, carbohydrates. If you look at the Tour de France, you might have an athlete consuming 1,500 grams of carbs in a day. And then you got someone in, your client consuming, or American football player consuming 700, 800 in a day, or a rugby player, 500, 600. And then you've got your client consuming 100 grams, maybe, right, on a low carb diet. And so, I know a lot of rugby players that are 8% body fat, and they're consuming 500 grams of carbs, right? So it's not inherently just the lowering of carbs that leads to weight loss, right? Again, it's all these little side effects of the low carb diet, which is protein intake goes up, vegetable intake goes up, processed food intake goes down.
Yeah.
So I would encourage trainers, regardless of the dietary strategy that your client's taking, try to think of those higher order principles. Like, what's actually going on here? Oh, my client, yeah, they definitely are eating more protein, or I see more salad, more vegetables. They're not snacking on chocolate bars at 3:00. Like, those are the actual principles that are leading to the change, rather than we get stuck on the label of like,
yeah,
whatever diet, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And there's a knock-on effect as well. Going back to the master the morning and on the night, there's a huge knock-on effect of getting those patterns in place that people will then stop eating more processed foods or more of the foods they know they shouldn't be eating, just because they've managed to get the right types of nutrients in at the right times. So they feel better and they treat themselves better and their brain function is better.
100%. Yeah. I mean, the one that really sticks out to me was always the example of, putting your seatbelt on.
Yeah.
Like, how many of us think about putting your seatbelt on? You don't. We're like robots. You sit in your car and your arm just goes over and you put it on. And that's just because we've done it so many times. And the idea of what they call like the environment triggers the cue. So the fact that you sit in the car makes you do that thing. And to your point, if we can get those good habits going where your kitchen triggers the right breakfast, or whatnot, but the challenge is always the couch and the TV room at the end of the day tends to trigger the red wine or full ice cream cue. So that's the one that we're always trying to, you can still live a little, enjoy that in the Friday or Saturday night, but if it becomes an everyday thing, then that's where for a lot of our clients, it can, start to derail things.
Just on the environment side of things, is there anything you do with people do you kind of check in on their environment? Do you ask them, what's your kitchen like? What's your space like at home where you're going to be eating? Because all those things must come into play.
Yeah, I mean, there's some good questions around. I mean, the first place to start is always the proximity of things. Right?
Yeah.
There's a study done in office workers where, if the snack was in your desk, you're going to do it 90% of the time. If you had to walk down the hall to like the kitchen canteen and it was 50% of the time you would snack. And if you had to leave the building, it plummeted to like 10 or 15%.
Studies have been done on that.
Yeah. So there's this idea that, so the problem obviously with the home is that, if this stuff is available and you subconsciously know it's over there, then we're more likely to do it. So that's always the first place, is to try to trim out. And even when people are working with kids, like, in the summertime, we were going for ice cream with our kids probably almost felt like every day.
Yeah.
But the ice cream was always over at the park or at the beach or somewhere, right? We were going off, we were walking there, we were riding our bike, we were doing an activity, and that was part of that. And so even there's a connection that's being made versus, the kind of sitting around and just mindlessly snacking on things. And so, I think that's one thing. And then I think the other one is that idea of pairing things. So if you got family at home, I mean, I know it's hard, but if dinner time becomes more of a prep with the kids, or if they can help out and pitch in some way, rather than mom and dad or the partners having to like hustle up and make this thing whilst they're taking calls, and it ends up just being, kind of a ready-made style meal. And then the kids are sat down by themselves, which is, a little bit of a reality of what we see a lot with people being busy. But, that's another way of kind of pausing, because I think all of us in the kind of madness of midlife is like, is this really how I want to be doing things? Like, and it's tough, but maybe we pick out a certain day of the week, maybe it's a Friday, or when we have more time, and we start to kind of build those little connections, because those are ways to help people change how they prepare food. Because it's amazing when you hear clients, right? They won't do something for themselves. I'm sure you guys see this, but then for their kids, it's like, well, I want them to take their vitamins. I want them to eat this food. I want them to do this. It's like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
How come you're not doing that for yourself? And so we, trying to help them out on that end is a big one for me.
Yeah, that's really good. Like, to have people hear that as well about routines at home. So important, bringing the kids into it and making it a happy routine, and something that's really positive around food could make a massive change in somebody's life.
Yeah. And I've heard gamification. This is something we're exploring too. I mean, by no means do I have all the solutions definitely on the kids front, but gamification of like points and scores to accumulate towards something. I mean, I've been blown away at, having the change from having to nag for certain things, like, hey, clean that up or whatnot, to then, them being a bit more self-motivated to earn the points to then. So those are all ways I think we can all start to figure out a better way, because it's obviously it's challenging, right? The last 18 months of everyone's just stuck in together. So all these things have just been really kind of amplified of how they impact us.
Absolutely. Yeah. Gamification is something I've explored with my kids as well. It does work, like turning everything into play and games.
It's crazy, right?
Success. Yeah. Why not with adults and food? Yeah, it does make sense.
Just don't turn it into a drinking game, Paul.
Yeah.
See how successful those are?
I was going to say they're really successful. Right. What next area, Matt? I think we had one to go into.
Yeah. So something, going off on a slight tangent potentially, we were interested to hear your thoughts on was the gut microbiome and sort of the role that plays. And I think as people's education around nutrition is improving, especially trainers, they're more aware of the role of things like this, but I still don't think they quite know what they can do to have a positive impact on that with their clients. And it might just tie into some of the stuff you've already covered, like get the meat in the right protein level and less of the ultra processed stuff as well. But have you got any sort of specific like recommendations or just general thoughts on how we should maybe be thinking about the microbiome? Because it seems to be growing in terms of its importance and our understanding of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a hot topic and it's so complex and there's so many facets of it that it's easy to get, enticed, especially if you're interested in this stuff, to kind of go down these rabbit holes. And the challenging part with it is that we actually we can't really say many concrete things in terms of what the evidence shows us. So even when I go do talks for medical docs on this topic, it's like, what are some of the best things to have to start with, the one thing we can say is having a diverse gut bacteria, so lots of different species, is associated with better health, right?
Right.
And the more processed food you have in your diet, the less diversity. The more unfit you are, the less diversity. Something that really shined a light on this was a lady named Dr. Lauren Peterson, who did some work with endurance athletes and was checking out their microbiome and looking at their performances. But in one aspect of the study, they had them take an antibiotic, right? And so there was a placebo group, control group that was just, general unfit population. And then there was the kind of fit athletes eating a good diet. And now amoxicillin, which is a broad spectrum antibiotic, that basically wiped out 95% of gut diversity in both groups. Sounds like a pretty bad thing. It's like, whoa. Now the antibiotic's doing its job. It's trying to wipe out a nasty bug.
Yeah.
The cool part is that the athletes who were eating well, and in this study, they took a probiotic, even 2 weeks later, I think it was a week to 2 weeks later, all of that eradicated diversity came back, right? So it's like it's like your back garden cutting everything down, but the flowers all come back. The group that was eating the processed food diet that was unfit a year later still had that eradication, which is really kind of mind blowing because obviously that group is more likely to get sick and tired and run down. Yeah. And so you can see how that loop really starts to exacerbate itself. And of course, there's connections to the gut bacteria and how, the brain via the vagus nerve, the parasympathetic nervous system. And so when we look at like anxiety and mood and all these things today, there's obviously, growing problem with that kind of stuff. So, what can we do? Well, again, when I do talks for the docs, it's like one of the best things you can do is build aerobic fitness, right? And so, and this is the one that in the medical community, they just totally goes missed, right? They're looking for different pills and things to give. And it's like, let's get them, conditioned. And, aerobically fit's always tough because people just think of running or whatnot, but you can use whatever tools at your disposal, which I'm sure you guys cover with all your PTs, but get them conditioned. Is a big one. And then, what you mentioned before, we see protein intake helps as well, reducing processed food. And then this idea of food diversity. So just, having a look at the foods that you eat. And if you're always having the same kind of, we're again, creatures of habit, we tend to pick similar vegetables or similar fruits. So challenge your client, even if you're a trainer, again, you got them every week, once a week, hey, let's get a new fruit or a new vegetable, and then at least it kicks off a bit of conversation, right? It always gets stuff to keep the conversation going after 3 years of working with the same client. So you can talk about, the recipe, the food, that kind of thing. But again, playing that long game, building it in more slowly to increase that food diversity, it's got a nice impact. And those would be the ways, a probiotic supplement will help in the short term. If people are struggling, if they're looking in the wintertime, again, with athletes, we use it to reduce the severity and duration of colds and flus, right? So it's less intense and it ends quicker. But otherwise, your client shouldn't have to take a probiotic to have their gut running well. If they have to take a probiotic for things to work well, it still lets you know you haven't resolved something, because it's like we can't take the training wheels off Otherwise, the person falls off the bike. We got to put them back on every time. And so that's where there's that opportunity to think on the physical fitness side, think on the nutrition side. And the last one is probably just like the mindset, stress, emotional stress, sleep kind of bucket, which obviously, we can go into a little bit, or trainers can, but if somebody has significant issues there, then referring out would be the best strategy.
Yeah. So it comes back to all them same basic principles, doesn't it? Because I do think that one of the dangers is as we start to, and I've had this a couple of times where clients approach me and they've maybe read an article in a paper about, I should be drinking red wine because it helps with my gut bacteria, or I should eat more fermented foods because that helps. And it's like, yeah, that's correct. But actually, are you doing any of these baseline things first? Are you hitting your training sessions or your activity levels? Are you prioritizing sleep? Are you doing, a reduction in processed foods? And I think people like to sort of get over concentrated on like they get stuck in the thick of thin things. They get like concentrated on the small things, and they just lose sight of this bigger picture. They go, I'm eating fermented food, I'm drinking red wine, I'm good, like I'm healthy.
And that's where, it's a good, if we get back to the drinking games, the analogy I use is with buckets, but you could use, a pint glass and a shot glass if you wanted to. Is like the big buckets are your fundamentals. And even if you're half as good at doing the fundamental, it still far outweighs the little shot glass or the little bucket of like you mentioned, like the red wine, the fermented food. Like, hey, great, but you can only ever get this much benefit. Whereas these big buckets, if you fill those up, man, you're 2/3 of the way home.
I'll take the red wine one though. You did mention Pinot Noir has got the highest level of polyphenols, is it? It's my favorite grape, so I was like, perfect. That'll do.
Red wine and dark chocolate, man. 2 top 10 antioxidant foods. Like, could there be a better way to do? Even beer's actually up there. It's not too far off broccoli. So not that I'm suggesting people replace broccoli for beer. Right?
Yeah, steak and a beer, perfect. So I like that the first principle you mentioned as well is just getting aerobic fitness up. Like I didn't know that one. What a simple win.
And like blood glucose control, especially after meals, hypertensive control, mood, sleep. Like, if all we're doing is get our clients fit, you're doing more than what the best drug in the world can do for your client. It really is, blows you away.
And it puts some importance back in that for trainers as well, because I think a lot of times personal trainers now are we have to be a bit more diverse. When I started as a PT, it was you did exercise and that was it. Now you kind of do an exercise, a bit of nutrition, a bit of lifestyle, a bit of sleep, and you're kind of in all areas of your client's life, and you forget that one of the best things you can do is get them fit. Like, just get them fit, get their aerobic fitness up. Yeah,
that's a great point, because I remember when you get busy and you're doing 40 hours a week, it's hard enough to actually even properly periodize your training plan for each client and really have it on point, right? Because you're running, and to then do sleep, nutrition, and everything else, like, it's really good for the trainers to program in that time to revisit every client and be like, are we actually getting more fit? Like what test or what barometer did we use to say this is our fitness level, because I think, that can, it's easy to get distracted by everything else. It's like, wow, we're doing well on the nutrition and the sleep, but we're training wise, we're still not making that much progress.
Absolutely. Yeah. The last area we wanted to go into, if you've got any insights on this that would help the audience, is because you work a lot with athletes, obviously, like athlete population. It sounds like you've got general population as well. So and everything in between, by the sounds of it. We get a lot of trainers coming to the industry, and for them, the kind of pinnacle of PT is working with athletes. Yeah. And I've found, and Matt's found in the past from working with football academies as well, Matt was part of Manchester City for a while. They're just the same. Like, an athlete is the same as an everyday person. They don't necessarily want to train. They don't necessarily want to follow rules. So are there any tips you can give people on dealing with the human? Because at the end of the day, this is all about dealing with people and getting them to stick to these rules as best they can.
That's just it. It's like for us, if you're 6'8" and with 44-inch vertical leap and can run like the wind, and you're in the NBA, why do I care about lifting or eating well? Like, I'm making $50 million. I think I'm doing all right. So you stumble upon these common problems that are sort of human based. And I think that's where building that rapport and relationship helps. So I'm sure you saw even the difference between working with academy players, which, Canada Basketball, we start at 13. So if I've got someone from 13 to 18, 19, 20, and I know their parents and I've seen them every year, that's going to have a different influence than I'm meeting an athlete for the first time and I'm only seeing them a little bit in that one season. They might be gone next year because they're off to a different team. And so it does get tough to kind of really move the needle at the elite level. And, you know, having had a chance to, you know, work with lots of different trainers who are working in the NFL, the NHL, or the NBA, they get frustrated because they don't really get a chance to, you know, you're sort of just trying to maintain during a season and trying to offset all the demands that go into it rather than actually, you know, building towards what you might want to do maybe in the off season. And so, yeah, I mean, for me, I guess what I've learned over the years is that, you know, to take someone who's really struggling with their health and has maybe even a health condition or whatnot, and to help them actually improve their health so their life is better, they're living, you know, they're happier, they're going to live longer, they're better with their partner, their kids. Once you've been doing it long enough, that win is, you know, a little sweeter than even that win of working with an athlete of saying, hey, we got an extra 4 points a game out of that one, or we got to, you know, they're both great. But I think, you know, to your point, it's like just helping people, right? How can we influence people? How can we help them out? And there's just so many people that need help. So, you know, if you want to work in the elite sport, hey, that's great. I think there's a lot of great lessons that you can actually take, to your point, just because they are human, that you can actually stick on the other group because, you know, they fit, right? They don't eat the right breakfast. They don't go to bed on time. They don't snack the right way. They need a lot of support and prodding. So yeah, it's not that different.
Cool.
You mentioned there, Mark, a few times we've mentioned it throughout this, just health in general, you know, just coming back to that. Because again, I think in our industry, that's been lost a little bit. It's all about physique and transformation still to a greater extent. But something I mentioned to Paul before we jumped on with you earlier was I really liked in your book some of the recommendations around assuming that someone's sleeping well and eating well. Here's the next piece of the puzzle, which would be some of the supplementation that you might take to improve like immunity and things like that. And I think that might be worth just getting you to mention quickly, because this time of year, everyone's picking up colds and flus and things like that. And obviously we've all been locked away for months. So everyone seems to be suffering worse than ever. And I think in this country, I don't know if it's the same everywhere, but we probably don't do a good enough job of pushing, you know, these are some simple things you can do that have quite a big impact if you just do them regularly. So What's your take on using things like supplements and that for improving immunity? I know you've got some great recommendations in the books, but just some sort of general guidance on that.
Yeah, sure thing. I mean, you know, your immune system has two arms to it. So there's an innate immune system, which protects you from getting stuff. And then there's an adaptive immune system that once you get something kicks into gear. And so you can actually think about different things for those individually. So to start with, I mean, vitamin D, right? I mean, it's, we are at a higher latitude, even here in the UK compared to Canada, which always sounds weird because we're colder over there. And so longer, darker days, you know, vitamin D status is going to go down. And if you're insufficient or deficient, then you're going to get benefit from adding vitamin D, right? So a couple thousand IU a day is a great place to start. You know, if your client's really struggling, get them checked with their doc. But what you do want to avoid, and this is something we see in elite sport, even that's kind of faded out, thankfully now, is this idea of kind of mega dosing, like take 10 drops, take 30 drops, 30,000 IU, 10,000 IU. You know, we got some great science, you know, guys in Manchester, I think Daniel Liverpool, you know, his work around vitamin D showing some harmful metabolites when we get up past the 4,000 IU a day. So let's keep it, you know, especially when we're personal trainers, let's keep it to what, you know, the general recommendations would be. And if people are struggling, get a test, go to your doc. So that'd be the first one. I mean, vitamin D. And if you could, you know, if you could fit in a holiday there in the winter, it's always nice, really ramp up those levels. And then if you're actually sick, this is where, again, this idea of a probiotic can help reduce severity and duration. And something as simple as a zinc lozenge, right, helps as well with the symptoms. It'll help to, again, accelerate that, shorten the time span. And, you know, even vitamin C when you're ill, like very simple, cost effective, right? You can go to Boots and get a 3 pound, you know, 10 or 12. I don't have any sponsorships, don't worry. But that's a great way, right? Rather than, I think a lot of trainers, and this is normal, right? The more into something we get, then we get really deep dive and like we want to spend 40 or 50 pounds on some adaptogen complex that's going to really augment immunity. The reality is you're going to do much better if you just hit, you know, vitamin D, vitamin C, zinc lozenge, maybe you go with the probiotic, but those are some great tools to just have in your medicine cabinet at home, or to kind of suggest to clients, because they'll actually get the most bang for their buck and they won't have to break the bank to actually get them.
I like the way every time you answer something, it's so simple. Not what's behind it, but I honestly think that's
good. I take that as a compliment.
It is a compliment.
Yeah.
It's good for people to see that it isn't this whole complex system that you have to put together and spend a load of money on, when there's a few simple things that if you did them well consistently, you'll have great health.
And that's just and again, just your point to the arc of, like, I'm sure you guys get this with training of, like, when we're more in the middle of our careers, we get so drawn into the going down the rabbit hole and really trying to mine these kind of exotic benefits or this. And then when you come out the other side, you're like, what, if we just do these main things well, we're going to get most of the way there. And then we can think about, but most of our clients aren't even there yet. It's like,
when you mentioned, I cringed when you mentioned the massive doses of vitamin D, because I've been on a course and I've been that trainer where somebody was recommending 10,000 IU per day, and you'd listen, and I didn't understand it at the time, but that was the recommendations.
Yeah,
I was thinking, I've been there, done that. So
yeah, no, it's tough, man. It's tough. We're all learning.
Yeah, that was it, learning at the time. Okay.
Good stuff, gents.
I think I haven't got any more questions from my end, Matt. Have you?
No, I think we've covered a lot of ground in a relatively succinct amount of time there, I think.
I think so.
We have to keep it relatively short, Mark, because, as you know, personal trainers have a terrible attention span. So
and we're including ourselves in that as well.
Yeah, I'll include myself in there as well. I've got a great memory; it's just really short.
Oh yeah, we keep it succinct, but we've loved talking to you. We could talk to you about many different subjects, but we've covered all the main bits we wanted to talk about there, and we just love this philosophy that you've got. We want to try and pass that down to more trainers, this idea of like long-term philosophy, building health, mastering the basics, and just really hammering that home. I think that's something that trainers aren't hearing enough of, especially in this country.
Yeah,
trying to learn the stuff up this end that's probably more exciting to them, but doesn't really carry over much to their clients. So I'm hoping that they've taken a lot from that today and learned a lot from it. So thank you very much for joining us, Mark.
Well, I appreciate you guys having me on, and if stay connected. If people want to ask questions, I got a unique last name, so at Dr. Bubbs on the Twitter and Instagram. If they want to fire away any questions, happy to answer.
And I'd also recommend that anyone out there that's working with people, go and get Mark's book that came out earlier this year. It's great for the type of clients we generally work with, and I know you've got a podcast as well yourself, haven't you, Mark? What's the name of that if people want to find that? Yeah,
I mean, there's the Performance Nutrition podcast, is the deeper dive into certain subjects. Kind of goes along with the book Peak, and then the Peak 40. We have a Peak 40 podcast, which kind of touches on a lot of these things of how we simplify things. Like, where do we start to make things easier for folks? And so it'll be a lot of the same themes of things we've talked about here today.
Excellent. Well, that's where to find Marc Bubbs, everyone. And thank you again very much for joining us, Mark.
Appreciate it, fellas.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks so much.